If you are curious about the Christian text, also known as the Bible, or if you have those who belong to the faith in your family, loved ones who you are wanting to engage with or wanting to understand, or even perhaps want to challenge, I have 2 study Bibles to recommend. Well, because these are Bibles, they have been written for those who believe that these texts are inspired. This one here is the Cultural Background Study Bible. So the Cultural Background, plural, Study Bible is exactly that. It is putting the text into the larger socio-political, historical context of the 1st and 2nd century contemporaries of the texts. Please note that I would recommend for you to go for the NIV version. The NIV, the New International Version, is an English translation version which originated in the 60s or 70s. All I know is that I grew up on the 1984 text of the NIV, like a lot of people who speak English as another language. The NIV have been considered to be a little bit too liberal for some people because, for example, they strive to interpret a lot of the very male pronoun of the 1st and 2nd century people because of the cultural context within the day and also the language, I suppose, into a more modern gender neutral brothers and sisters, for example, if the context is indeed applicable to all. It is quite enlightening when you see the text within the context of 1st and 2nd century people, of a culture you don't necessarily understand, of a time you don't necessarily understand, because it's almost 2,000 years ago. So that really it's a zoom out of the text, if that makes sense. And I believe this has received a reward. I can't remember what reward, but I think it is a mainstream book award. So I'll put that list down below. So the reason why I mention that is because I think even though it is written to believers, the language is very matter of fact, other than the emphasis of the text being inspired. And you don't have to believe that to read this. A lot of the facts here are quite scholarly, how should I put it? Is scholarly credible. So there's the... And again, if you are looking, it's a whole different topic. If you're choosing different translations of the Bible, I believe it is best to aim for somewhere in the middle between the spectrum of word for word translation to thought for thought translation. And I'll try to put an image up here somewhere or down below. Because as speaker of 2 different languages, and some of you who speak more than 1 languages will know that simple word for word translation isn't always the most accurate, because ultimately words are there to convey a message. And so if the message doesn't get translated and all you do is translate the words, it is a bit like delivering an empty package. You know, the package is all there as specified, but the content isn't quite as it should be. And so this is copyrighted by Zondervan, so I'm a little bit nervous about that. Women's education in antiquity. Most men, in antiquity that is, most men considered intellectual activity a predominantly male exercise. This was true even though exceptions were made for elite women, and some intellectuals praised the ability of women, or more often of particular women, to learn. Greek men often married women over a decade younger than they were. Again, this is in the age of antiquity. So it is not surprising that Plutarch, I never know how to pronounce his name, observed that most husbands doubted that their wives could learn. By contrast, Plutarch advised a new groom to take an interest in his wife's learning, although warning that, if left to themselves, women are led astray by passion and foolishness. Women were less likely to be literate than men, sometimes estimated at 10% as often as men of the same social class. The two advanced disciplines were philosophy and rhetoric. Some philosophers allowed women to be disciples, but throughout Greco-Roman antiquity, barely any were trained in rhetoric, i.e. public speaking. More relevant for the New Testament was Jewish education in Scripture. Jewish culture reared boys, but not normally girls, to recite Torah, the law. Granted, women listened and learned in synagogues. A few even attended rabbis' lectures. Yet they were not taught to recite Torah, and rabbis did not train them as disciples. See notes on Luke 10:39-41. Jews writing for diaspora audiences, for example, Josephus and Philo, expressed greater skepticism of women's intellectual abilities than did most rabbis. Praising the empress as an exceptional woman, Philo concedes that she became virtually quote-unquote male intellectually. Philo, Embassy to Gaius 320. Women filled high roles in synagogues in some diaspora settings, more open to women's leadership, but even there, they were rare. So I'm going to leave a link down below for you to investigate this further. So I'm just going to leave you with this image here, Women's Education in Antiquity, in relation to a passage where women were asked to stay quiet in church and to be submissive. And so, of course, a lot of progressive 21st century women and men will take exception to that. And if we see the text from through 21st century eyes, it sounded very unpalatable. So this particular book, this particular text, this particular cultural backgrounds, study Bible put all the words within context. If you are looking for theology, if you're looking to be told what to do, perhaps this isn't quite for you. But if you want to understand the kind of worships, gods and goddesses, temples, rituals, the position of women, the position of slaves and children, the position of soldiers, the wars, the food, the shelters, the customs, the clothing, this is pretty good. So that's one. And then if you want to zoom out with this, it gives you if put the text into a larger real life events and informations and context from the first century. I also want to remind you that this is not with Deuterocanonica. So this does not have the extra 7 books called Deuterocanonica by the Roman Church, and it's called the Apocrypha by the Protestant churches. This only consists of 66 books, I believe. The author, but over 40 authors. So the Christian text, the Christian Bible, is not one book. It is a combination of about 66 books, authored by over 40 authors throughout the 1st, 2nd century. And so here, this is an interesting book because it has full notes about how all of the passages have been translated from ancient Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew. So if you look at that, for example, all that is notes about translating this text here. This is also available online for free, so you don't have to buy the book. I just like physical books because I like to underline things. And this is definitely a reference book. It is a lot harder to chew. And also note that a lot of the textual critics or textual criticism, I believe, is a skill, a field of expertise required to reconcile a numerous amount of manuscripts in order to make the one text. So, for example, Homer, the text, the story from Old Greek, doesn't exist only in one manuscript, because if you think about it, there isn't a photocopy machine over there. So if you want 500 people to read your book, you have to rewrite the same manuscript 500 times, and that may involve 500 scribes, or it may involve 30 scribes or 50 scribes doing 10 times the work over for the same text, writing it over and over and over again. And because of human error and because of the human variables there, with the differences in scribes thinking different things, approaching different things about the text, then you have all these variants. Also, in some of these books, I read somewhere that, for example, the apostles may not be as highly skilled in writing in Greek, and so they have to hire a scribe, and the scribe will then have to write and make some interpretation and some adjustments or some artistic, poetic, literary license to make the words flow better, for example. So there is that translation between what is dictated, perhaps in not so elegant a Greek, into a more elegant Greek that is the letters ultimately documented in one of the epistles there. So here, for example, so that's why a lot of the scholars here, you could see here from Dallas Theological Seminary, I know that a lot of them specializes. There's a lot of really credible scholars in the area of textual criticism there, but the Dallas Theological Seminary is I believe it's called Reformed. I think the theology is called Reformed. I am not very well versed in theologies, I'm sorry. And so that might not be in line with yourself if you're a believer, or the people who you seek to understand, right? So the note is that this is not as quote-unquote theologically ecumenical or neutral, quote-unquote neutral is not the right word, as let's say the NIV or the New International Version translation, which a committee of translators consists of people from a variety of different backgrounds, from a variety of different countries, from a variety of different denominations. Here you see different denominations as well, but you see a lot of people from the Dallas Theological Seminary. So it seems like they are the... So it's just to note, but all the notations here are pretty transparent so that you can see where they're coming from, and you can free to disagree with the translations that they've decided on. So here others are Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, University of Aberdeen, University of Sheffield, Catholic University of America, Cambridge University, Columbia University. So there's a few others, but at Brandeis University, but there's a lot of Dallas Theological Seminary. So that's just something to be aware of. So you could see here, this focus is zoomed in into the text, and it shows what is the original word there, and why they've decided to translate this word within this context in this manner. It's all here, and you can free to disagree. So, an honorable quick mention, if you want to just read the actual text without the interference of studying or of all this very important and enlightening information which to see the text through, then you can pick up one of these, the New Living Translation. This particular one by Cambridge University Press, I believe, is out of print, but the New Living Translation, I believe, is owned by yet another company. And so welcome to the capitalistic world of today, I suppose. I believe the owner of the New Living Translation is Tyndale. So Tyndale. This is a smallish book, so the font is a bit small. You can pick it up for like $10. It's easy to read, and it goes through the translation based on thoughts for thoughts. So for example, this is a very crude example, and I'm not necessarily representing the translation approach of the New Living Translation, but for example, in some Asian cultures, you'll say, have you eaten, as a way of saying, how are you? And so to translate word for word, you'll say, have you eaten? But to translate thoughts for thoughts, you'll say, how are you? Because within the cultural context of the people who says, have you eaten, it is the equivalent of how are you within the cultural context of Western, of English-speaking cultures, for example. So I don't know if the New Living Translation have taken it that far, but that's the approach of this translation here. So it's a lot easier to just read without getting stumbled, because the language is awkward, because somebody somewhere along the line is trying to capture the ancient Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, or ancient Greek. Now, speaking of that, another honorable mention is the New American Standard. And the New American Standard, before this appeared in the scene, as far as I'm concerned, I would have probably had to recommend you guys to read this one, which reads very clunkily. It reads very awkwardly, because it is trying to be as faithful to the ancient text. And as a result, it doesn't translate as elegantly and as smoothly into the English way of speaking these English words, but they are very popular among seminaries because, for example, like little insertion of English words to make the words reads, or to make the sentence and the paragraphs and the language read smoothly in English, they would mark what is not in the original text. So the New American Standard translation had been thus far the most transparent in their approach to translating the text. As a result, though, it becomes not the smoothest to read with. And this is where this one, I think, for me anyway, is better suited. But I have to mention this, especially in this edition here. I think the Bible-making world run in a parallel universe, almost in its own time bubble, and sort of carry on the tradition of the old-fashioned binding here that I think would have been lost to time if not for these guys. So credits where credits due. I mean, it's just amazing. And I will have to talk about this book and this particular edition, this particular typeset, this particular paper by 2K Denmark here in, well, Denmark, in a different video. So for the moment, if you are curious, if you want to engage with someone, challenge somebody, and understand things from their own point of view of the people who are of the faith, the NET Bible Full Notes Edition, available for free online. And this one here I cannot highly recommend enough. The Cultural Background Study Bible, the New International Version translation version of it, because they have one or two other translation for the Cultural Background Study Bible. Zoom out, place the text, the 2,000-year-old text, into context, and then zoom in, really analyzing, picking apart every word that's been translated into English. So good luck with that and have fun. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask down below.